Thank you. Hi. So, yes, I'm Kerry Watkins from Social Brighton. I'm a social media consultant and trainer. Most of the work I do is helping businesses to develop strategies that really work for them and then deliver the training they need to implement any processes or to upskill on practical skills. The reason I started doing this 6 years ago was because I think there's a huge amount of potential for businesses with social media. And I'm passionate about helping businesses work out what the best way for them to use it is, as well as to mitigate the risks that go with it hand in hand. So, some statistics to start with. It's predicted by 2020 that there will be just under 3 billion social media users in the world, and that the average business will be spending 21% of its marketing budget on social. So I think it's really important to take it seriously, to be involved now, and to do it really well. There's a big difference between doing an okay job on social and doing a really good job. Everybody here can probably cook, but we're not all top chefs. So whilst there's no one-size-fits-all approach to a social media strategy, I've put together 8 tips that I hope will give you some important things to consider in working out what's the best route for your business. So the first one, I should stop looking that way. The first one, really, before I do any work with any client, the first conversation we have is about where the business is now and where they want it to be, so that we can work out how social media helps them on that journey. So everything that you're doing online should be helping your business in some way. So generally we start with quite broad goals. We look at things such as, is it about driving website traffic? Is that important to your business? Is it letting people get to know your company values or launching a new product? And there are many different ways that social media can add value to your business. So once we've defined some broad goals, we try and refine those into clear, measurable objectives. And I'll run through a few examples of objectives from clients that I've worked with to give you an idea of how diverse they can be. So if you're in e-commerce, for example, your objectives will probably be around increasing website traffic, conversions, or perhaps increasing the average transaction value compared to the previous quarter or the previous year. A charity that I worked with decided to use social media to change the public's perception of them because they felt their reputation with the local community didn't really reflect the work that they did. So they used Facebook and Twitter to share everything that the charity did with the community to change that perception. Another client I worked with recently wanted to reach a completely new audience demographic. So we looked at using Facebook and targeted younger people with specific interests and then developed a more youthful tone in their online presence. Another client uses Twitter to develop sales leads. They're in the craft beer industry. So we find potential clients for them on Twitter, and then every month they have an Excel sheet of Twitter leads that the sales team can then go in action. And finally, another client is an NGO based in Africa, and their project is about changing attitudes towards gender equality with young people in Nigeria. So a million miles away from everything else I've just talked about. But the strategy there is to use Facebook to develop conversations with their audience around gender topics so that they can then collate the comments on Facebook and analyse the conversations for sentiment. So hopefully that goes to show every business and each one of you here will have very different objectives. So everything that you do from there going forward on social will be completely unique. So a good starting point is to benchmark where you are now, look at what you're doing on social media objectively, and then start to give yourself some targets for improvement. So it's perhaps by researching other organisations or looking at other businesses that you aspire to. So number 2, and I'm not going to do a De Niro impression, who are you talking to? So I've actually had some interesting conversations today with people about who their audience is. And I believe with social media, as small businesses, we'll make a bigger impact if we stop talking generically to the masses and try and be more personal in our approach. And you can only do that when you really understand the people you're talking to. So the reason social media has now over 2 billion users this year is because primarily it's a form of communication between people. So whilst it has evolved to include organisations as well, if we don't engage people and share content or conversations that resonate with them, we're unlikely to get very far. So an exercise we do in a lot of training sessions we run is to create some audience personas. And a lot of this is relevant for other marketing activity as well. So have a think about who your customers or clients are, or who your audience is. And as well as thinking about demographics, think about their interests and their circumstances and how your product or service relates to them. If you have any market research, or you can actually ask your customers, then that's a great starting point. But if not, a dose of common sense and what you know about them already will put you in the right direction. And I think it's really important to understand how they feel about your brand. If Southern Rail had considered how their customers felt about them recently, they may not have published this tweet. Asking your customers who are pretty annoyed and frustrated at your service to fight the unions on your behalf was not the best move, in my opinion. So it shows that big brands can get this wrong sometimes as well. And there was quite a negative backlash online. Whereas with MailChimp here, who are really good at understanding their customers, handing out high fives on Twitter, they understand how the customers feel about their brand, and they talk appropriately to them, so the customer feels valued and it's more likely to increase loyalty. My third tip is to tailor your content to each social network. So first of all, we advise people to only focus on the networks that are really going to work for you. So they're the ones that your customers use and the ones that suit your business. And it's better to, if you're a small business, better to start with one or two and do them really well and nail it before you try and do all of them and spread yourself too thin. And then plan for each of them separately. So cross-posting the same content on all of your social networks is not ideal because people use them in different ways. So with LinkedIn, for example, we're often in office mode, we're thinking about professional networking, whereas with Facebook, we're in our downtime and people are more relaxed. So an example of this in practice is the craft beer client I work with. They use LinkedIn to share industry updates, and the language that they use is speaking directly to beer buyers and wholesalers because that makes sense for that network. Whereas on Facebook, they're very consumer focused, so they're talking about products and reviews and feedback. And likewise, video that may make sense for fun behind-the-scenes footage on Snapchat or Instagram would not necessarily be appropriate to publish on YouTube. It's also important to think about the frequency that you publish because this should change with social networks. It may be relevant to tweet 20 plus times a day, but if you publish with the same frequency on Facebook or LinkedIn, you will start to annoy people pretty quickly. So think about each network, and through trial and error and different publishing frequencies, you'll start to learn the best frequency for you. Number 4 is about planning content. So a lot of businesses, when I first speak to them, they're posting ad hoc on Facebook or maybe even scheduling on just a weekly basis when they get time. And whilst real-time, fresh content is great for social media, it doesn't allow you to build really strong campaigns from planning in advance. So it's the difference between knocking something up in the kitchen with what you've got to hand and planning a really decent menu in advance where you're sourcing quality ingredients so that you can then craft something really impressive that people remember. So the first piece of advice I give is to start using a calendar to note your key sales and marketing activities, events, product launches, any key dates for your business, and then work backwards to develop your digital campaigns. I worked with an events company recently that is a good example to illustrate this. So they use social media to promote the events that they were promoting. But that was all they were doing. So when we looked at all the different opportunities social media had to offer, we then developed a blueprint for all of their annual events that had far more content and was far more engaging. So we looked at generating awareness prior to the event. Then it was the selling tickets and confirming attendance. Then there was real-time content at the event that they often didn't have time to do because they were so busy working and engaging with people that were there. Then they were collating the user-generated content from the event and then leveraging that afterwards. So there was a lot more work and content that was really valuable to them that they hadn't considered before. And it was all about planning ahead of time and making sure that that's coordinated with other marketing activities. So planning ahead means that you can work out what it is you need to do, gather the assets you need, schedule ahead of time, and then allow yourself time for interacting at the end. And it's really important to vary your content. Most businesses here will be wanting to sell something, a product or service. And whilst most of us want to do that, if we only publish updates that are very salesy, very promotional, very salesy call to action, we will start to quickly turn people off because people are not looking for that on social media. And it's important to remember that nobody is obliged to follow you. From a personal point of view, I think that's great that we can create our own Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds from things we're interested in. But from a business perspective, it puts more pressure on you to really share things that are going to add value to your audience's newsfeed. And to quote a very wise man called Mark Schaefer, who writes about social media marketing, he said, "We need to change our minds with social from sell, sell, sell to help, help, help. And if you can do that, you'll succeed on social." So have a think about how your business can add value to your audience's news feeds and show some different aspects of your organisation. And an example I wanted to show you is from Picture House Cinemas. So they had incredibly rich content. They had a lot of film content from the distributors, and they could plan their social media marketing months in advance. But they wanted to show and share the other elements of their business that were their USPs and that set them apart from their competition. And these were things like the food and drink offering, the staff and the atmosphere, the kind of things that you wouldn't get at an Odeon. So we worked on a content strategy together to help them achieve this. And these shots are just a few taken from their Instagram feed. And so you can see, as well as the lovely alien photo there, they sprinkle that film content with other things that are going on in the business. So lovely donuts, when a celebrity turns up and they take a photo of him with stormtroopers. There's a competition that they ran with Picture House members. And most importantly, as well as being happy with that, and they felt that reflected their business, it gave potential customers of Picture House a good idea of what you could expect, as opposed to being at an Odeon. So my fifth point is about brand voice. So I believe you have to sound authentic and human on social and not a faceless corporation. And that can sometimes be very hard to do when you're managing an account for a business. So an exercise that I always do with clients is asking them to imagine if your business was a person and it walked into the room, what kind of person would that be? What would their character be like? What language would they use? How would they behave? And then most importantly, how would they relate to your customers? And to give you a couple of examples of how I think this works really well. So the National Trust. This is a tweet they did recently. I think we can read they sound pleasant, articulate. There's an appreciation of the great outdoors, obviously, and of good photography. And we could assume they've just been out for a walk and taken a picture. And then a very different tone from Red Bull. So they're young, humorous, cheeky, interested in sports. And I think these two examples illustrate really well how a well thought out brand voice can represent your customers, your business, and give your customers a sense of who you are. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but so if you can imagine your business as a person, I think that's a good starting point. Utilise the tools that are out there. There's a lot of tools and software that can save you time, help you manage social media, and help you be more creative. And there's far too many to go through today in 15 minutes. But a few of the key ones for small businesses are to use a scheduling tool, such as Facebook publishing tools, or Buffer, or Hootsuite, or Sprout Social that you have to pay a little for. But these will save you no end of time and allow you to plan those campaigns ahead of time. There are also some really powerful social listening and monitoring tools out there. If you've not done any social listening or monitoring so far, then TweetDeck and Hootsuite are good ones to start with, that are both free. If you want to talk more about that, come and ask me at the stand. Feedly is a really useful tool for content discovery. It certainly saves me hours. And Storify is a really underutilised tool that's great for curating user-generated content and collecting updates from various social networks, from yourself and others, and pulling them into one story. So my 7th point is about measuring. So there's a huge amount of data available with digital, and depending on what your objectives are will determine which metrics you measure. So you need to work out what your own picture of success is. However, every single business will benefit from recording data on a monthly basis at the very least, because then you'll start to see improvements and patterns and trends. The key metrics that are probably relevant to everybody are about how many updates you publish on each network, the reach, so how many people you're reaching or impressions, how many people you're engaging, and then website visit and conversions. But it's also important to analyse content at a post level, because if you had a Facebook post that had significantly more shares or more click-throughs than another one, you need to work out why that was, because then you can start to replicate that in future content. So regular analysis will help you learn and improve. And my final point is about involving the whole team. Sometimes I see social media marketers working in quite an isolated function, and they can become very unmotivated, and there's a lack of creativity. So if you can communicate your strategy with the whole team, so everybody understands what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then on a monthly basis share some top-level insights of what's worked and what hasn't, then I think you start to develop a really strong culture of sharing ideas and support for the social media role. And it could be that other departments have got some really good ideas to feed into the marketing function. And likewise, marketing may need to feed action points into the sales team or the customer service team. So to summarise the whistle-stop tour through social media strategy, first of all, make sure you have objectives so it's really clear what you're trying to achieve. Make sure you know who you're talking to and your language is appropriate, and you know where to find them. Tailor your content to the networks that you don't use too many if you don't have the time to do it. Plan your campaigns in advance. Ensure you have a nice brand voice that reflects your organisation. Utilise the tools that are there to help you save time. Measure and learn and report data every month, and involve more people to help out with creativity. Thank you.